Statistically speaking, the Wild West wasn't quite as glamorous as Hollywood would have us believe, but it certainly wasn't a place for the faint of heart. Sure, you had the gunslingers and the saloon showdowns, but what most people forget is that everyday life itself was the real duel. Forget rattlesnakes or outlaws. Your deadliest enemies were bedbugs, cholera, and the unholy stench of a cattle-churned street. You see, when people picture the Old West, they imagine brave sheriffs, dusty duels, and daring pioneers. What they don't picture is the fact that brushing your teeth meant rubbing salt on them, or that your bed was a five-star resort for fleas and lice. And let's not even get started on outhouses, corn cobs, and the shared towel at the saloon. Now you might think you'd survive out there just fine. But here's the truth. Without plumbing, without soap that didn't peel your skin off, without clean water, and with dust storms filling your lungs every day, survival wasn't about who drew their gun fastest. It was about who could endure the filth the longest. And let me tell you, most people lost that fight. Diseases spread quicker than rumors, and even the toughest cowboy smelled like a walking cattle drive after 2 weeks on the trail. So tonight, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Wild West's dirtiest secrets, the hygiene horrors that made life in frontier towns far more dangerous than any outlaw's bullet. But before we dive nose first into the grime, make sure you hit that subscribe button to the Sleepy Historian tonight. Leave a comment and tell us which Wild West hardship you'd have dreaded most. Okay, partners, saddle up, hold your breath, and let's ride into the filth. When people picture the Wild West, they see wide streets, bat-wing doors, a heroic silhouette in the dust. Take 2 steps closer, though, and the illusion dissolves. Those same streets were open sewers, churned mud shot through with horse manure, kitchen slop, butcher offal, spit, and far too often blood. Horse-drawn wagons were the engines of commerce. Their waste was the constant byproduct, left to rot where it fell. Without municipal sanitation or organized garbage pickup, refuse piled up curb to curb. A boot could disappear in a single sucking step. Violence didn't pause for housekeeping. After brawls spilled from saloons or a shootout lit the afternoon, bodies might remain where they dropped until someone's grim duty began. Even on quieter days, the smell carried, heavy, sour, unforgettable, because human waste, too, found its way into the street. Outhouses served some homes, but many people simply dumped chamber pots at the threshold. Visitors remembered towns like Deadwood for a hellish stench, the kind that clung to hair and clothes and stayed there for days. The health math was as simple as it was lethal. Filth plus water equals disease. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, diseases that modern sanitation renders rare, found ideal conditions here. A small fever in a clean city might mean a day in bed. In frontier towns, it could mean an obituary. A few places tried ordinances that made residents responsible for the strip of street in front of their homes. Without enforcement, paper laws remained ink on paper. Real change didn't arrive until later, when larger settlements began hiring scavengers, laying pipe, and formalizing waste removal. By then, the reputation had set. The West's main streets weren't just dirty. They were dangerous, and yet people adapted. They learned to read the color of standing puddles, to step where wagon ruts dried fastest, to keep food sealed and lamps high. Mothers scolded children who tracked muck through doorways. Shopkeepers spread straw to soak up spills. Blacksmiths swept metal filings into piles, if only to keep sparks from mingling with the sludge. Civilization advanced in inches, but for decades, the default setting of a frontier town was not the gleam of oil lamps. It was the brown, bacterial slurry that made every errand a gamble and every lungful a risk. Home promised relief. Beds betrayed it. A typical bed was a rough wooden frame and a tick stuffed with straw, hay, corn husks, or feathers. Comfort was relative. Those organic fillings cracked and compacted, opening micro-caverns where bedbugs, lice, and fleas set up kingdoms. The unfinished wood itself, split, pitted, and impossible to sanitize, offered perfect bug real estate. After a day of grit, a sleeper became the banquet. Cleaning was sporadic, water was precious, and laundering an entire tick was a major production. In boarding houses and inns where turnover was constant, miners in by dusk, drovers by dawn, parasites had a commuter rail. People tried what they could, smoking beds with sulfur, scrubbing joints with lye, hanging mattresses in bright sun, even burning ticks and starting over when infestations won. But harsh soaps ate skin and fabric. Firewood and spare straw weren't always available. Many simply endured the bites. Relief outdoors was no kinder. The outhouse, often a small shack perched above a pit, was standard because indoor plumbing was rare and expensive. In winter, the air inside could burn your lungs with cold. In summer, flies turned the space into an airborne hazard. Vent cutouts, the famous crescent moon and star, were practical, not quaint. They let in light and a whisk of breeze and, at a glance, advertised occupancy. Pits filled. Families shifted the shack to a new hole or shoveled dirt into the old one and moved on. Pathogens didn't move on. They lingered in soil and water tables, part of the invisible ecology of frontier illness. Toilet paper as we know it didn't become common until the late 19th century and remained a luxury. Settlers improvised without apology. Corn cobs, dekerneled and at hand, served a dual life. Newspapers and catalogs did too. The Sears Roebuck catalog, first published in 1888, became an unlikely fixture in outhouses, its pages torn loose for the most practical reasons. People reached for leaves. Mullein, with its soft nap, earned the nickname cowboy toilet paper, moss near creeks, and rags destined for washing and reuse. Mistakes stung. Poison ivy taught unforgettable lessons. It wasn't comfort. It was coping. In all of it, bugs in the bed, pits in the yard, cobs on a nail, the pattern was the same. Hygiene was not a preference, but a negotiation with scarcity. Every choice balanced time, fuel, and water against fatigue and survival. The West wasn't thoughtless about cleanliness. It was trapped by logistics. Teeth told the truth of the West. Daily brushing wasn't a norm. Toothbrushes were rare, and when present, used bristles of animal hair that splayed and shed. People wiped teeth with rags dipped in salt or baking soda, swished brine, or gnawed twigs. Ancient methods that cleaned a bit but couldn't halt plaque or rot. Pain followed. And when it became unbearable, the solution was brutally direct: extraction. The dentist might be a barber with stout wrists and crude forceps. Anesthetic was whiskey. A friend held your shoulders. After you went home with a bloody gap and a bottle. Traveling dentists existed, bringing burrs and fillings, but their circuits were wide and their fees high. Most people met their fate in a chair that wasn't made for dentistry, under tools meant for something else. Infections didn't respect guts. Untreated, they could seed fevers that turned deadly. Dental misery didn't just dim smiles. It ended lives. On the floor of public life, another habit multiplied risk: spitting. Chewing tobacco was as common as coffee, and the expectoration that came with it peppered streets, saloon boards, courthouse corridors, and even church porches. Saloons placed brass spittoons, but many missed or ignored them. Spit mingled with sawdust and dust, forming a sticky, microbe-rich mat that helped tuberculosis move from mouth to world. By the 1890s, towns began posting fines for public spitting. Some enforced them with zeal. Old customs died slowly, but ordinances, education campaigns, and shame gradually pressed the habit indoors and into receptacles. And then there was the scent of work itself. Cowboys didn't smell bad because they were lazy. They smelled bad because water was far away, cattle were near, and the trail stopped for no one. Drives took weeks. Rivers didn't always align with the day's march. Leather chaps and wool shirts absorbed sweat and smoke, then gave it back in waves when the sun hit. Some men rubbed sagebrush on their clothes for a fleeting mask. Others accepted the musk as part of the job. Diet didn't help. Coffee, beans, salt meat, and neither did sleeping in the same clothes you worked in. The odor wasn't a moral failing. It was an occupational hazard. Together, bad teeth, spit-slick floors, and the pungent aroma of labor reveal a culture wrestling not with indifference, but with immovable constraints. The frontier's code prized grit. Hygiene, when it happened, had to fit inside that same code. Water was the West's great currency, drunk, fought over, diverted, and all too often contaminated. A creek shaded by cottonwoods could look pure and carry a cargo of manure from a herd that crossed upstream an hour earlier. Wells, when dug shallow or sited downhill from privies or corrals, invited runoff to trickle back into the bucket. Mining towns layered on their own poisons. Mercury and arsenic used in ore processing leaked into streams, embedding chemical danger into every sip. Outbreaks of cholera and dysentery didn't arrive as mysteries. They arrived as consequences. Bathing under those conditions became both precious and rare. Every wash began with the chore of hauling, then the expense of heat. Families filled a tin tub and, to stretch fuel and water, bathed by order, eldest to youngest. parents before children, cleanest before dirtiest, depending on the house rules. By the last turn, the water was gray and the steam smelled like the week. In larger towns, public bathhouses offered a soak for a fee. Miners and teamsters came away pink and grateful. But bathhouses were dots on a big map, and paydays didn't always line up with filth days. Hair care mirrored the theme. People combed with wood or bone to delouse as much as to detangle. Homemade lye soaps stripped grease along with moisture, so women braided long hair tight to keep it cleaner longer, and men sometimes shaved to beat lice in hot months. When they could, folks added lavender water or a touch of oil to tame the straw-like feel. Whiskey doubled as rinse and disinfectant because it was, at least there. Laundry warranted an entire day and a full body ache. Water had to be hauled and boiled, soap chipped, garments scrubbed against washboards until knuckles cracked, then wrung, pinned, and dried stiff in desert air. Denim and wool fought the process at every step. In boomtowns, Chinese immigrants built thriving laundries that turned miners' and cowboys' wages into clean shirts, an essential service that kept the camps marginally healthier and the workforce barely presentable. Public accommodations did their part, and not always the helpful part. Shared towels hung in saloons and boarding houses like flags of truce with germs. Men used a bar's communal cloth to wipe beer foam and dust in one pass. It remained until someone decided it was done. On saloon floors, sawdust spread for practical reasons. It soaked up whiskey, spit, vomit, and blood, adding traction where boards turned slick. Without frequent sweeping and replacement, it also soaked up and held on to bacteria. By night's end, the floor was a layered history of the day's appetites and fights. Absorbent, yes, but hardly clean. Sanity in this world came from small upgrades, a well-sited uphill and at a distance from the privy, a weekly bath when rivers ran high, a paid wash when coins allowed, a clean towel kept aside for a family, not the room. Hygiene was less a set of rules than a ladder, and every rung cost time, fuel, or money. Frontier clothing multiplied hygiene challenges, especially for women. Fashion and function collided under layers of chemise, petticoats, corset, skirt, garments that complicated simple needs like using the toilet. Outhouses weren't built for elegance or ease. Solutions evolved with necessity. Open-crotch pantaloons made hovering feasible. Chamber pots reduced midnight trips when snow or danger made the yard untenable. Before commercial sanitary pads appeared in the late 1880s, menstruation management relied on whatever could absorb and be washed or discarded. Grass, cotton, rags, rabbit fur, sheep's wool. Women rinsed and reused in secretive cycles that required water, privacy, and time, commodities not always available. Some turned to douching and scented waters to manage odor and discomfort. Advice ranged from practical to dubious, and products from the era's booming female hygiene market often overpromised. Men weren't spared bad advice. The late 19th century teemed with pamphlets, quack doctors, and mail-order remedies promising cures for weakness, private diseases, and imagined moral failings. Circumcision was promoted by some physicians as a hygienic cure-all, wrongly claimed to prevent everything from masturbation to seizures to syphilis. Advertisements thundered in capitals. Testimonials appeared beside etchings of respectable beards. Fear sold as effectively as soap. Hovering above all these specific struggles was dust, the great equalizer. The West's climate conspired with hooves and wheels to loft a fine grit that found its way into every crack and cupboard. Streets unpaved, trails unending, wind relentless. Dust-coated bread on the table, seeped into trunks, quilted itself into bedding. Cowboys rode inside roiling clouds raised by cattle. Townsfolk lived inside smaller versions of the same. People swept daily and still ate grit. They learned to cover kettles, to shut doors softly, to shake blankets outside and watch a brown halo drift away. The body paid a price, dust lung, a blanket term for chronic coughs and respiratory trouble, dogged settlers and drovers alike. And yet, within the constraints, communities carved out dignity. Saturday night baths became rituals when possible. Mothers sewed washable pads and hid a second towel for guests. Ranches built root cellars that doubled as cool rooms for water storage. Towns posted no spitting placards and fined those who ignored them. A family might walk an extra quarter mile to draw from a cleaner spring or pool coins for the bathhouse before church. The West's hygiene wasn't a simple story of squalor. It was a story of stubborn, practical creativity arrayed against distance, scarcity, and grit. Strip away the myth, and the frontier looks less like a dust-washed movie set and more like a marathon of trade-offs. Cleanliness was work, hygiene was strategy, and survival, day after day, was the reward for getting just enough of both right.